Every dictator fears betrayal. But for Joseph Stalin, betrayal came not from an enemy, but from his own blood. His name was Yakov Dzhugashvili, the eldest son of the man who ruled a sixth of the earth. Born in the shadow of power and condemned to live without love. To the world, Stalin was the man of steel. To his son, he was a stranger. A father who never smiled, never comforted, and never forgave weakness. When Yakov was a boy, he tried to end his life. Stalin's reaction was simple. He can't even shoot straight. That was their bond. A father who mocked his son's pain, and a son who would spend his life trying to earn a look of approval that never came. This is not a story of war or politics. It's a story of what happens when power consumes even family. The story of a son who went to war to prove himself, and a father who let him die to prove a point. Yakov Dzhugashvili was born in 1907, long before his father became the ruler of the Soviet Union. His mother, Kato Svanidze, was Stalin's first wife, a gentle woman from Georgia, the only person who ever softened him. But when Kato died of typhus in 1907, Stalin didn't cry. He walked away from the funeral, saying only, "This creature softened my heart of stone." She died, and with her died my last warm feelings for humanity. After her death, Yakov was sent to live with relatives. For years, Stalin never asked about him, never wrote, never visited. When Yakov was finally brought to Moscow as a teenager, he met not a father, but a legend wrapped in paranoia. By then, Stalin had risen to power. He had new allies, new enemies, new children, but no room for an awkward, quiet son who reminded him of the past. Yakov tried to fit in, but Stalin mocked his accent, his manners, his looks. At family dinners, he called him a useless weakling. Even his second wife, Nadezhda Alliluyeva, could see the boy's pain. She once told friends, "He looks at his father the way a dog looks at a stick." Historian Simon Sebag Montefiore writes, Yakov grew up craving affection in a house where emotion was a weakness and love was replaced by fear. It was the perfect Stalinist childhood, cold, silent, and built on control. By the time Yakov reached adulthood, he no longer wanted his father's love. He wanted his respect, and for that, he would go to war. In the 1930s, as Stalin built his empire of fear, his son Yakov Dzhugashvili found refuge in the one place where he thought he could prove his worth, the Red Army. He studied hard, trained as an artillery officer, and tried to bury his shame under discipline and duty. But no matter what he did, he could not escape his father's shadow. When Yakov married a young Jewish dancer named Yulia Meltzer, Stalin raged. He insulted her, called her a whore, and demanded Yakov leave her. When his son refused, Stalin cut him off completely. At family gatherings, Yakov sat silent, ignored, ridiculed. Once, after a bitter argument, he attempted suicide. Again, the bullet missed. Stalin's reaction was as cruel as ever. He can't even do that right. Despite the humiliation, Yakov stayed loyal. He believed that serving in his father's army was the only way to prove himself. When the Germans invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Yakov went to the front lines, not as a commander's son, but as a soldier, determined to fight and finally earn the respect that had been denied to him all his life. Historian Oleg Klevniuk later wrote, Yakov marched into war not just against the Germans, but against the silence of his father's love. But Stalin's love was a war no one could win. And soon, Yakov would find himself surrounded, not by comrades, but by enemies. It was July 1941. The Red Army was collapsing under the German blitzkrieg. Whole divisions vanished in days, swallowed by smoke and panic. Amid the chaos near Smolensk, Lieutenant Yakov Dzhugashvili's unit was encircled, out of ammunition, cut off, starving. The young officer faced the unthinkable. The son of Stalin, the man who preached not one step back, was about to be captured. When the Germans found him, Yakov tried to claim he was just another officer, but they quickly learned his name. The news raced up the Nazi command chain until it reached Adolf Hitler himself. Hitler saw opportunity. The propaganda machine began to grind. Posters, radio broadcasts, newspapers, all shouting the same message. Stalin's own son has surrendered. The Soviet leader abandons his own. The Nazis tried to use him, to humiliate Stalin, to break Soviet morale. They photographed him in a prison camp uniform, interrogated him endlessly, even offered him better treatment if he denounced his father. Yakov refused. He said nothing. He endured hunger, beatings, isolation. According to British historian Simon Sebag Montefiore, Yakov behaved more honorably than his father ever expected. He would rather starve in captivity than betray his country or his blood. But back in Moscow, there was no sign of compassion. Stalin's aides informed him his eldest son had been captured. The dictator's reply was ice cold. "I have no son named Yakov." That single sentence sealed Yakov's fate, a son erased by the very man who created him. By 1943, the tide of war was turning. The Soviets had trapped the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, and among the captured was Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, Hitler's prized commander. Then came an idea from Berlin, a trade, one German Field Marshal for one Soviet lieutenant. Hitler's negotiators sent the proposal through secret channels. Exchange Yakov Dzhugashvili for Field Marshal Paulus. When the offer reached Stalin, his answer was instant and merciless. "Stalin, I will not trade a field marshal for a lieutenant." What kind of father would do that? The words dripped with irony. Because Stalin was not speaking as a father, he was speaking as a dictator. To him, Yakov was a weakness, a reminder that even gods could bleed. According to historian Robert Service, Stalin's pride outweighed his blood. He saw Yakov's capture not as tragedy, but betrayal. In Stalin's warped logic, his son had failed the Soviet Union, and in his world, failure was treason. So Yakov remained in captivity, in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, isolated, humiliated, tortured. The Germans even forced him to pose for photos, showing the dictator's son behind enemy wire. Every image was a dagger aimed at Stalin's propaganda machine. But Yakov never begged for mercy. He never renounced his father. He endured, silent, proud, doomed. In April 1943, guards found Yakov's body near the camp fence. He had run toward the electrified wire and died instantly. Was it suicide? Or was he shot trying to escape? No one knows for sure. But one thing was certain. The son of Stalin had found a freedom his father never could understand. When news of Yakov's death reached Moscow, Stalin said nothing. No tears, no words, just silence. He was at his dacha outside Moscow, surrounded by his guards, a table littered with empty glasses and cigarette ash. Molotov, Beria, and other aides stood waiting, but none dared to speak first. Finally, Stalin broke the silence. His voice, calm, almost indifferent. Stalin, he died a hero for his country. Then he stood up, turned his back, and left the room. Those who saw him later said his face looked older, not with grief, but with something colder, resentment. Historian Simon Sebag Montefiore later wrote, Stalin saw Yakov's death not as a loss, but as punishment, deserved, inevitable, the price of weakness. To Stalin, emotions were liabilities. Even his own blood could be sacrificed to preserve the myth of his strength. He never visited Yakov's grave. He never mentioned his name again. To the world, Yakov simply vanished, like millions of others lost to his will. And so, the dictator who demanded loyalty from millions could not show mercy to his own son. For the man who called himself the father of nations, fatherhood itself was his ultimate failure. Stalin built his empire on fear, and even in death, he ruled through it. He demanded that men die for him, that mothers surrender their sons, that loyalty to the state replace love itself. And when his own son was taken, he proved that no bond, not even blood, could survive in the world he created. Yakov Dzhugashvili died in a foreign camp, burned by the same cruelty that his father unleashed on millions. In the end, Stalin didn't lose a son. He lost the last piece of humanity he had left. Historian Robert Service once wrote, Stalin killed empathy itself, and Yakov's death was the final proof. Because when power becomes God and fear becomes faith, even family becomes expendable. The father of nations couldn't save his own son.